talk a little bit about causation. How do we know that one thing causes another thing to happen? This can be something in the physical world, like you kicking a ball caused the ball to move, or this could be something more in the psychological world. Because you were angry, you got into a fight. This could be something in the social world. Because tensions were high, the crowd started to riot. So what does it mean to say that one thing caused another? The problem I want to talk about today is rival causes. Many times there's either more than one cause to any given event, or the cause that someone thinks they've found isn't the most important cause. It might just be one of the many contributing causes. And a lot of times in the media and in the news, we will hear that certain things happened because this thing, whatever it is, caused it to happen. But in actual research, it's really difficult to figure out what the cause of one thing is to another. But if we're thinking clearly, if we're thinking critically, it's actually kind of difficult to determine what the cause of something is, especially as it relates to human behavior, either as an individual or in groups of people. But that's not what you're going to hear on the news and in the media. There's going to be journalists and scientists and commentators who think they know what caused this or that riot. They know what caused the temperature to change. They know why someone committed an act of violence. There's a number of reasons people believe that they know the cause of something. Sometimes it gives us a sense of power, of knowing why something caused something else. And in the scientific world, that is the case. The more we understand what causes things to occur in nature, the more power we have over it, in the sense that we can potentially manipulate it for our own advantage. A rival cause is an alternative explanation for why a given event occurred, right? It's just an alternative explanation. So when you hear someone say, I know what caused X, you can immediately begin to question, are you sure you know what caused X? Is that the only cause? Is that the most important cause? There are a few questions you can immediately begin to ask when someone says they know what caused whatever happened in the world. So for example, let's talk about crime rates. What we understand about mass incarceration, this is the accelerated pace in which we began in the United States locking people up, giving them long sentences in prison, right? So that began to spike in the 80s and in the 90s. And then in the last 20 years or so, it sort of dropped off. Actually, I want to say around 2011, it began to decline. If someone were to say that the decline in serious violent crime in the last 10 or 15 years is because people are becoming more civic minded. People are beginning to have more of a concern for their community and those around them. Therefore, we don't need as much of a police presence anymore. In other words, this person is saying, here's an event, here's a phenomenon. There's a decline in violent crime across the United States. Therefore, we don't need police anymore, or we don't need a lot of police anymore, or heavy police or law enforcement tactics, because the reason there is a decline is not because of the police. It's because people are becoming more compassionate, more civic-minded, more concerned for those around them in their communities. In other words, this person thinks that the reason that there is a decline in violent crime is because something about people's attitudes have changed. They have changed in a benevolent way. They've changed because now people are more likely to care about their neighbors. Now, that's a hypothetical scenario, but I don't think I have to explain to you why that's probably not why there's a decline in violent crime. That's probably not the cause. But immediately you might think of other reasons that could be the cause. You might think of more than one that could have contributed to that cause. But what we do know is that mass incarceration has declined in the last 10 years. Why is that? That's what researchers are trying to figure out. But if someone tells you they know the cause, like this is the one cause and that's it, there is no other explanation, you should immediately begin to question that. What are some potential causes for a decline in violent crime, if there is one? Or what is the potential cause behind a reduction in the amount of people who are being incarcerated, or a reduction in the length of sentences? Some people might say it's because the economy has turned, right? Some people might attribute high crime rates and low crime rates to the state of the economy. In an economy where it's really difficult to get a job, there's going to be high crime rates. In an economy where it's easy to get a good job and a good paying job, there will be lower crime rates. Other people might say it's because of advanced technology, because now there's cameras everywhere and we have more DNA evidence and we have ways to track people on their cell phones, and people who would normally commit violent crimes are now second guessing or thinking about it before they do so because it's so much easier to get caught. Other people might say, well, it's because all of the gangbanging that was really common in the 80s and 90s is kind of subsided. There's still gangs. It's just not the kind of gang-ridden environment that it was in the 80s and 90s. Other people might say it's actually the larger police presence, the harsher sentencing. The fact that people got longer sentences is why there's less people going to prison. But here's the thing. It could be a combination of all of those things, or it could be none of those things. It could be something I haven't even mentioned. When it comes to social movements, things that are occurring in the economy or in the environment or in the culture in our society, trying to nail down one particular cause is really difficult. It's usually more than one cause. Most of the time, people who are proclaiming that they know what caused this or that or the other, they're just proclaiming their favored cause. It's the cause that they think is important or relevant or provocative or whatever, and so they're promoting that cause. This is the reason that this has occurred. This is the reason that there's a decrease in mass incarceration, or the reason that there's a decrease in violent crime. Whatever explanation they give, that's their pet explanation that they have some interest in promoting. So I'll give you an example. In my own life, I'm going to tell you what I think about a particular thing, but I can't prove it. So there's been a lot of research done on people who go about getting their education when they're incarcerated. People who get an education while they're locked up are less likely to come back to prison. So why are they less likely to come back to prison? Is it because they're smarter or have a better education now? Most people will say, well, it's because now they have more opportunities to get a job. In other words, they got an education, now they have more opportunities to get a job. And therefore, if they have a job and a good job, they're less likely to commit crime and come back to prison. So getting a job, being employed, is the cause of not coming back to prison, right? More access, more opportunities for good employment is the cause of lower recidivism rates. Well, I looked at a study a couple of years ago that was a meta-analysis of research on the relationship between education and recidivism and employment. And it showed that there was a reduction in recidivism for people who got an education while they were locked up. Right? So people who get an education are less likely to come back. But it didn't show any increase in their ability to get a job. In other words, the people who got an education while they were locked up and those who did not get an education were still just as likely to get a job. There was no difference in their ability to get a job. So if that's the case, if the people who got an education weren't any better in the job market than those who didn't get an education, but the people who got an education are still less likely to come back to prison, then it might not be jobs. It might not be their ability to get a good job that actually lowers recidivism rates. I think what it is that in the process of getting an education, something about their identity changes. Something about the way they see themselves in the world changes. That occurs in the process of education. And so whether or not they're able to get a good job when they get out is not nearly as important as the fact that they now see themselves in a different way. So that's what I think is a more important cause of lower recidivism rates. Am I right? I don't know. There has to be more research on it. I think a transformation in how someone sees the world, which happens in education, is a likely cause of lower recidivism. But I'm not going to say to anybody that it's the cause. This is actually the one and only cause. It could be a number of things. Now, the certainty that I have about my idea, my favored, preferred idea, is limited depending on how many other alternative explanations there might be. So let's say that there are only two possible explanations for a reduction in recidivism. So the likelihood of people coming back to prison, there's only two explanations. It's either the fact that they can get a job now, or there's been some sort of intellectual transformation. They now see themselves in a different way. If those are the only two options, then I have a 50-50 chance of being right. So I can have a good amount of certainty that I'm correct because there's only one other option. It's either that one or mine. But let's say there's 5 potential causes. There's 5 potential causes that explain why people who get an education are less likely to come back to prison. Let's say when they get an education, now they have better access to jobs. When they get an education, they change a sense of identity and who they see themselves as in society. When they get an education, their family comes back into the picture and they have more family support. When they get an education, they start to pay attention to their physical and mental health. And so that leads them to live a much more successful life. Or when they get an education, that makes it easier for them to understand how to get good housing or continue their education. So maybe these are different causes that could lead to a reduction in recidivism. Well, now my certainty about my cause, the one I think is the reason, I'm much less certain about it now. When there were only 2 potential causes, I could be pretty certain that mine was probably correct. It was a 50-50 chance. But when there's 5 potential causes, I'm much less certain. So the certainty I have, or anyone has, about their favored cause, what they think is the cause of some event in the world, is less and less certain to the degree that there are more and more potential causes. So when someone says they know what caused X, so they know what caused COVID to spread throughout the world, they know what caused a decrease in violence across the country, they know why people commit crime. You got to ask yourself, is the cause that this person is promoting, is it the only one? Can I think of any alternative explanations? If I looked at this from a different perspective or a different point of view, what might I say about the cause? Here's another illustration. Think about the crime you were convicted of. I'm not assuming you're guilty. Whether or not you're guilty is irrelevant. Just for those of you who are actually guilty, you did what you did. If somebody were to ask you, why did you do that? Why did you do what you did? You're probably not going to give just one answer. You're probably not going to give one cause. You could list a number of causes. You might say, like, I don't know what the crime is, but you could just say something like, well, I was desperate. I was in desperate need of money. You might say, well, because I was intoxicated. You might say, because I was enraged. You might say, because I grew up in a bad home and that's all I knew. You might say, I grew up in an impoverished community. You might say, because I have a chemical imbalance. All of these things could have contributed to why you did what you did. It's not just one of them. And I think that's pretty obvious. After you think about your own life and the decisions you make, there's probably a lot of different reasons why you choose to do the things that you do. So just as a habit that I've done for myself, one that I would recommend you do for yourself as well is if you are claiming that you know what the cause of something is, you should take a step back and maybe rephrase that as you know what a cause is. You know one potential cause of several that may have led to a given event, for why you did what you did, or why the economy is in the state it's in, or why we're going to war, or why COVID spread throughout the world, whatever you're thinking of. If you have figured out some cause of it, you probably want to remember that what you believe is the cause of something is a cause of something. It may not be the specific cause of something. And when other people use that kind of language, this is the cause of whatever, then you want to take a step back and say, really? Is that the only possible explanation? Is that the only possible cause? Or are there other alternative explanations, other causes that may have led to this event? Now, when you watch the news, there are some really popular, controversial issues in the news where people are attributing a particular cause to given events. They know that this happened because of this. And I think if you listen to them and if you just pay attention, they are only pointing out one potential cause of anything. There's a lot more to the discussion of causation. It's a classic discussion in philosophy and in science and anywhere people are doing good, solid research. It's just a good rule of thumb to know that many times people will proclaim they know the cause of something, and really it's just one cause among many, and it may not even be the most important one. So keep that in mind for yourself as well, because as I've discussed in a separate lesson about intellectual humility, the realization that we could potentially be wrong in the things that we believe or say is an important attribute to be mindful of. It's the virtue of intellectual humility.